The other day I was in the shop, and I was drilling out the holes in a chair seat. I was using the traditional method with a bevel, square, and a mirror, but I thought to myself, there has to be a better way. I said this to myself with some confidence because I was well aware that Kyle Barton and the boys over at B&B Custom Tools already make one. A beautiful one. I mean, just look at it. I was also aware that the B&B Custom Tool jig was based off of a Peter Galbert design, and Peter Galbert has offered that design up to the masses, so I don't have to feel bad about iterating. And iterate I did. Here's what I came up with. The important measurements were pulled directly from Peter Galbert's design. I just made it look a little bit more production ready. I also added this 3D printed piece and made the entire thing digital fabrication friendly. Here's what you need to know about this jig. There's a pivot point and an angle gauge, and they work together. If you've been hanging around these parts for about the last 4 years, you know that my two current obsessions are printing on very old printing presses and making chairs. Last year when Xtool offered to send me the P2 laser for review, I had no idea how I was going to integrate it into my workflow, but I was interested enough to give it a try. It didn't take long to become an integral part of my shop activities, especially for print and chair making. Here is a print block. Here is the print.
Here's a print block. Here's the print.
Here are some print blocks. Here's the print.
For chair making, I made these templates out of plywood for all the turnings, so I can easily make things like those. But then I also made templates for all the other parts. So it's looking like another win for Team Laser. My CNC router, on the other hand, is quickly becoming a short-term storage platform. This thing doesn't love half-inch plywood, but it will do it. I designed these pieces to be glued up, which will form the top pivot point. This is where your drill bit pivots on. But I also made a 3D printed version, and this is easier for me. There are only two critical measurements on this entire jig. One is the pivot point of this spinny thing. It needs to be a set distance from the center point to the bottom gauge. And the second is the relationship between the thickness of this block and this reference edge. They need to line up. For this jig, this distance needs to be exactly 0.75 of an inch. And I left it just a little proud so I could trim it down to be perfect. Why, yes, I did screw that cut up. Thank you for asking. I'm going to glue these on, and then I'm going to cut it again. While we wait for the glue to dry, I might as well show you how to calculate this out. Using a caliper, measure from this surface to the back edge. 5.15. 5.15 plus 0.75 equals 5.9 times 25.4. Puts it into metric, because millimeters are easier to measure out than inches, and you won't make stupid mistakes.
Nobody's gonna know. They're gonna know. How would they know?
Chair leg angles consist of two angles. A rake, which is front to back, and splay, which is side to side. If you put together rake and splay, you get a compound angle and a direction in which to drill it. That's called the resultant or the sight line. These are all sight lines laid out in the chair plans. So all I need to do is drill a hole in line with this sight line at a very specific angle. And that's what that jig will do. Fake sight line. I'm gonna say the hole needs to be right here. Mark a 90-degree line off of that point. Align the reference surface of the jig to the sight line, and then slide the jig forward and back to line up with the angle I want. This jig works in both directions. Attach the drill into the pivot point, stab the brad point into the hole location. That should be a perfect 15-degree hole that's in line with the sight line. So that's angled 15 degrees, but front and back perfectly 90. $15 degrees exactly. I'm not gonna lie to you. This worked better than it should have. Plus or minus 1 degree is totally acceptable. And this is just spot on. Nobody's gonna believe how well this thing works because I hardly believe it myself. This is the front right chair leg. It's supposed to be at 18.5 degrees along this sight line. Zero out the digital angle gauge. And we're going for 18.5. $18.4. This is my design, but it's not my idea. So I'm making the plans for this available free of charge. There's a laser cut version like this one, there's a CNC cut version, and there's no reason you couldn't make this on a table saw. There are some 3D printed parts if you want to 3D print them, or you can make those little blocks that I showed you earlier. You will need a drill bit and a drill rod extension, and this little coupler thing. Links to those will be in the description as well. I spent more time making the video for this jig than the jig itself, so I definitely think it's worth the investment in time for speed and accuracy in the future. This thing is definitely geared towards chair making, but I have no doubt that there's other uses I'm just not thinking of. If you want to learn more about the Xtool P2 laser, everything's down below. I want to thank you for coming along with me on this journey of self-discovery, and I'll see you on the next one.